You're listening to The Switch. The Switch is a podcast about ideas and experiences that change our minds. I'm your host, Chase Harris, joined as always for this discussion by my co-host, Alex Berner. This week, week 6 of our Outwitting the Devil series, and the principle: recognize that your brain is a receiving set that can be attuned to receive communications from the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence to help you transmute your desires into their physical equivalent. Now, before we dive into this principle, we do start with a quick recap of last week's exercise about rendering useful service. Then we jump into a brief discussion on this principle, what it actually means, sort of deciphering it, because it is a kind of a wordy one. And then we jump right into this week's exercise that we actually do 2 rounds of live before we break out into breakout rooms for small group discussions. If you'd like to be part of this process, if you'd like to take part in the small group discussions or be part of the live audience during the recordings, our podcast is hosted by the 52 Living Ideas Meetup community. That is where you can go to take part in the podcast. We record Monday nights, and that is at meetup.com/52livingideas, 52 Living Ideas. This podcast is also a Patreon-funded podcast. By no means is it necessary that you support us through Patreon, but if you do find what we are doing here useful, you can head on over there, and for as little as $1 an episode, show us some love, and occasionally get access to some bonus content, things like bonus interviews when we have guests, sometimes the breakout room discussions, things like that. This podcast is produced by Mojo Filter Media. That's our audio company. We specialize in audio for interactive media. We do sound design, mixing, audio programming, composition. So if you just need your music mixed, head on over. You're going to get a great result from that. Or if you've got a full-blown video game project or art installation that needs some heavy work done on your sound design, your music, your audio implementation, head on over to www.mojofilter.me. All right, and without further delay, week 6 of our Outwitting the Devil series. So, for anybody joining us for the first time, if you are not familiar, Outwitting the Devil, written by Napoleon Hill a long time ago. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. It is written as a conversation between Mr. Earthbound, Napoleon Hill, and the devil himself. And it is a confession. It's the devil's confession about all of the ways that he induces people to what he calls drifting. Now, Napoleon Hill studied success and failure, and he published Think and Grow Rich, which was largely about success. This book is about success in the eye of what makes people fail and how to overcome those forces of drifting. So you may hear us talk about drifting, you may hear us talk about success and failure. Just know that is sort of the baseline that we're working from. One other thing to note about this book: it was written in 1938, but it was not published until 2011 because it was considered too, I guess, politically incorrect for the time by Napoleon Hill and his wife, because it does criticize a lot of institutions of power. So anyway, that's what we're working with. We've been going through these principles one at a time. These are principles from the book that are specifically what the devil confesses are principles for success. And, they are all useful on their own. So don't feel like if you're picking up here, you have to, go back to the beginning and start over. Although I do recommend that just because they're useful. Today, what we'll do is we'll do a really short recap of the principle from last week. I gave everyone a little exercise to do to try to embody the principle. And if anybody did the exercise, definitely let us know in the chat. We can call on you, and you can take 2 minutes to let us know what you thought, maybe give a little feedback and any of that. So starting now, anybody can just throw it in the chat if you did that. So we'll do that quick recap, and then we will launch into the principle for this week, followed by this week's exercise, and then we will go from there. So let's just jump into it. Alex, you want to give your feedback first while people are lining up in the chat on last week's principle? Just a reminder, last week's principle was about rendering useful service first. Rendering service equivalent to what you demand from life and rendering the service first. So Alex, take it away.
Yeah, so mine, I started back during those 5 minutes last week. And it really is a series of just little things because the thing that I wanted out of life was a strong community, good personal interactions, strong ties to the people around me and my family. So the useful service was I made myself emotionally available for people around me. I reached out to my friend via text because that's something I could do while we were recording. And then later in the week, I made sure to take any calls from people I wanted to have closer connections with and not be like, oh, I can do that and maybe tomorrow, I'm working today. I made sure that I displaced the work instead of displacing the person. And I, also set up different times to call other people that I always have that feeling. Oh, I wish I, reached out and checked in on them more. So I did that like maybe 6 times, and none of it was anything crazy. It was just more of a pattern habit building exercise. So yeah, I thought this was really useful, and it was nice to even in those just 30 seconds reach out to a friend and make it known that I'm there to help them if they need anything.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. All right, real quick, let's go to Sally. Sally, you're next. What did you think of the exercise from last week? Give us your thoughts. What did you do if you feel like sharing? You've got the floor for 2 minutes or so. Don't forget to unmute. Oh, Sally, hold on a second. I've got it.
Okay,
There
that's
you go.
good. Okay, so I want to be able to contribute to society is one of the things I want out of life. And then another is to be a better parent, I guess. So for the first one, you had had us list some like 5 minute or less tasks, and I had done those. I'm asking for like copyright material, whether it could be shared with me. And then I'm part of a documentary that a college, a university is doing nearby on a project that I'm working on. And then as far as parenting goes, I made some I became like a little bit more strict where I thought my children needed more guidance, like more rules. I have great kids and they're pretty on top of themselves, but I think for a few things, I could be a little bit more strict. So I did that.
All right, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Sally. And do you feel like those things, the sort of service first mentality of doing those things was a change from what you normally do, or is that sort of how you normally approach?
Well, you know what? Oh, yeah. That is a good question because I kind of forgot about that part. I was just thinking of the actual tasks themselves. Sure. But I am really big on visual reminders. And so I think I'm going to write that down and post it a couple places like my computer, laptop, and maybe somewhere else. And then because I really admire that idea and I think I could put it to good use.
Cool.
So I'm going to put that on my computer, and even if it's a different task for next week, but I really like it. So I'd like to keep that in mind while I do things, and I think will encourage me to be better at it.
Nice. Glad to hear it. I think you'll like this week's exercise as well. Joe, you're up.
So I kind of combined a couple of the practices here. I looked at it from what type of service I'm providing right now to everyone else. And, on a professional and a personal level. So I'll just break out some of the things professionally that I started to evaluate myself as to what would be the best fit for me professionally. And then how could that be of service to others?
Nice.
So I started to identify areas that I'm most interested in. One of the things that I actually learned through 52 Living Ideas, I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to take up too much time. But I also started to do a little bit more of inquiry as to some of the disciplines and things that I need to do better in order to facilitate that service. So things like time management, balancing theory and action, were some of the other things. Personally, there's a self-acceptance, self-forgiveness to not be a perfectionist. But this all feeds into how I'm interacting with people professionally and what work I can do for them in my ideal self. So this kind of fits in with the ideal self exercise that I've been working on. And again, I looked at it on a personal and a professional level. The personal level, rendering service is pretty simplistic. That's something I kind of do already. But there were also some personal habits of mine as well that I recognized needed to change in order for me to provide a better service to other people. So, some of those include, physical, habits, essentially sleeping habits, things like that. And so, I mean, I don't want to go on and on. I mean, I have a whole list of, identifying diminishing returns, like when to put things, when I'm researching things too long and not necessarily getting the optimum product out for somebody that they need at work, but in general too. That also fits into my long-term goals. So I had a unique way of doing this particular exercise. I started to finally look at myself more or less as the service provider. And so then I kind of recognized my self-improvement areas, and the ideal self fits in naturally to this exercise.
Nice. Both of you guys. That amazing. I have so many ideas, and this fits so well into this week's theme and exercise. Thank you both for sharing. One thing I want to highlight about what you said, Joe, is you looked at your ideal self in terms of, in this case, like a career goal, and then asked yourself, how could I essentially frame that as a service? How can I do that as a service, and work at it from that angle? And I think that, first of all, that helps you focus in a way that I don't think a lot of people learn to focus, especially starting out in careers. And it also it helps kill some of those productivity killers like perfectionism, because let's bring it into my career for a second. Like when I'm working on mixing an audio track, like a band has sent me a multi-track, and I'm mixing it, and they're paying me, they're a client. That's essentially, I mean, that is very basically a service for them. If I get into the perfectionism of my mix, now I hold my work to a high standard, but if I become a complete perfectionist to the point where I'm not delivering a mix to them, now I'm not delivering a service anymore. I'm not rendering them a service sort of as the main goal. Now I'm caught more in my ego, my self-fulfillment of, do I think that this is perfect? Can I give it back to them perfect? And I'm not thinking anymore about, well, they want their song mixed, they want something good and something that meets the standard that they hired me to accomplish. I need to get out of that mindset and into a much better one that is more productive and will essentially keep me more focused. So anyway, thank you guys for sharing that. Anybody else want to share real quick before we run into this week's exercise? Alex, did you want to jump in at all before we move on?
I think Joe's really hit on something there, which is I see a lot of people who don't, take care of themselves, and because of the lack of seeing how, taking care of yourself eventually leads down the line and can lead you to help other people better. And even in the example you just described, if you're more in check with your, obsessiveness to make things perfect, perfectionism, all that type of stuff, you can better deliver a service for somebody else and just not be worrying about something that is unnecessary.
Yeah. Cool. All right. This week's theme. Now, I'll admit before I read this week's idea was probably the most difficult one for me to translate from reading into some idea that I could do something with. And, maybe this just gets into the way that my mind works, but often when I read something, I kind of have to reframe it in my own words and my own patterns of thinking and my own images, whatever I'm using cognitively to process these ideas. This one was the hardest one for me to process. And I think it's because of the language, but I'm curious how other people respond to this. So here's the principle as worded in the book. Recognize that your brain is a receiving set that can be attuned to receive communications from the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence to help you transmute your desires into their physical equivalent. One more time, because that's wordy. Recognize that your brain is a receiving set that can be attuned to receive communications from the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence to help you transmute your desires into their physical equivalent. For anybody with us live, Alex just posted it in the chat in case you'd like to read it. Now, my first question is, what does this principle mean? Alex, do you want to give it a shot before I launch into what I think it means?
Yeah, basically to me, trying to reduce it down to the most basic principle, it seems to me like it's saying your brain, your mind is the connection between how your life manifests itself and all the knowledge, energy, wisdom, and matter out in the universe. So your brain is what takes in signals and produces what your life is. And to specifically, I think it's making kind of a comparison to a radio, something like that, where you can tune in. It says a receiving set that can be attuned to receive communications. Basically, like a radio, you can tune into different wavelengths. So this 52 living ideas is a wavelength you can tune into. It's here, and it will have natural implications on your life, right? Even if you just show up, you don't do anything, it's going to affect the physical manifestation of your life. And you can do this for any variety of different, anything in the world could be one of these wavelengths. If you get into a group of people that have, extremely negative thinking, that's a new wavelength and you're tuned into it. And your brain is going to take all that information that it gets and manifest it into your life. So basically, I think it means a few things. You have to regulate the inputs and basically those inputs are unlimited, right? At least in the language that it uses. And you have to know this and consciously choose what your brain is filtering and what it's putting out on the other end.
Okay, so that's pretty close to my interpretation. And in fact, it may just be that actually aligns pretty well with my interpretation. And I'm curious to hear how other people interpret this. I see Julie raised her hand, so I'll call on you in a second, Julie. So the way that I wrote this out after thinking about it for a little bit was, my shortened version is use your mind to actualize your desires, which seems like obviously true and not even worth saying, because of course you're going to use your mind to actualize your desires. What else would you use? But I think more specifically, like you said, you have to regulate the inputs, right? You have to understand that, first of all, there's a gap between your perception and reality. And the way that your mind pays attention to things and filters things and sorts things and judges inputs is something that you can actually do something about and have some insight into. So that's the input side. You can direct the inputs and you can be familiar with the filtering that your mind does. And then on the other side, there's the self-mastery of attention, which is like the output side, which, maybe input and output isn't the right way to put it, but the way I see attention, it's like being able to direct your attention in a way that furthers your goals and desires, whether it's things like material wealth or values or, being able to focus in on your virtues. Attention is the key. And I think that's an insight in Stoicism and Buddhism alike, that attention is sort of the thing you're playing with. And I think the way that I see this principle boiled down in sort of my way is like, pay attention, because that's what matters and fills the gap between where you are and where you want to be.
Yeah, I think I like that interpretation. And I think it's important to note that recognize is the verb, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. It's to notice this. It's not necessarily saying giving you any specific rules with how to deal with it. It's just knowing that this is how things work.
Interesting. Julie, you had your hand raised. How did you interpret this?
Immediately, I thought of what Einstein said about you are not going to find the solution in the mindset of the problem. And it is about focus, I think. As law of attraction says, men are naturally creative and visionary. And if 10 men have a vision for an island or a creation of some kind, the problem with the world is that 9 of them will immediately put their focus on the lack of it in front of them. But the one person who keeps his eye on the vision and his focus there has the power of the entire universe and divine energy behind him. So that's what. And oftentimes, if you are in the problem, if you let go of the question, give it to the universe, and just relax. If you are in a problematic mindset, if you just relax and you trust the answer will come, you're taking a shower and all of a sudden the answer comes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think maybe naturally I focused less on the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence part. But I think, for a lot of people, that is a meaningful way to think about the way the universe works. And, we're not even necessarily discussing the mechanisms of the universe so much as almost like a behaviorist approach of, if this happens, then this happens, and not even why. So, that's my own cognitive blocker to get through or get over or interpret in my own way. But yeah, I like what you said, Julie. So, a question secondary to how do you interpret this might be, how do you interpret the part about the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence, if that's even a meaningful part of this for you. Sharon, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I interpret this, and I've studied various teachers that talk about this, as being the energy of your brain waves are vibrations that attract similar vibrations in the physical world, which then becomes your life and the creations in your physical world. Abraham Hicks talks about that, choose your thoughts. And the law of attraction, someone else brought that up too, that your actual thoughts are energy waves that then create your life experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. All right. Now, there's one other point that I kind of want to bring up, and I mentioned the filtering aspect, and this sort of goes into the exercise for today. But one of the things that I think this also calls us to do is recognize the ways in which our mind is imperfect, like a radio receiving set. There's the technical term might be something like signal to noise ratio, right? When you're tuning a radio, anybody who's had like a manually tuned radio, I know this is old, but you can turn the tuner dial and like it kind of moves into the right place where it's picking up what you want. But as you're sweeping into that area, there's noise that happens. And if you're totally detuned from where you need to be, it's all noise. And there's some ratio between signal and noise as you're tuning things. And I think as your mind filters information, as your attention is directed by things like your system 1 processes, your sort of automatic cognition, there are patterns in place that cause noise to look like signal. Things like cognitive biases, things, maybe that's a good wrapper for all of what I'm trying to say. But I guess the reliability of your mind as a tool should almost always be in question. So paradoxically, I guess the way that I see through that is to gauge your confidences in things. And there are a lot of good techniques for doing that. But that's just the final point that I wanted to put on this is your mind may be a receiving set, but it's an imperfect receiving set that can be attuned to receive what you need and to transmute your desires into their physical equivalents. So the more mindful you can be of the imperfections, the more you can counter for those things, and the more it's possible to not perfect the circuitry you have, but the more it's possible to better utilize it. Maybe that's the right way to say it. So before we move on to the exercise, Alex, any other things you want to throw in there?
No, I mean, I think we've hit it from a bunch of different angles. So
Cool.
move on.
All right. So this exercise, I hope everybody has something to write on and something to write with. I hope you've learned by now that showing up to the switch means I'm going to be taking some notes. Here's what I'd like for us to do. And we're going to do this live, but it's going to take us potentially more than 5 minutes. So the exercise for this week is to go back to your description of your ideal future self. And this was from principle number 2. If you didn't do principle number 2, no problem. Here's how you're going to do this now. You will become your future self. That's inevitable. Now, whether you become a less than ideal future self or a closer to ideal future self depends on the kinds of choices that you make between now and then. Now that's obvious, but thinking of it that way is actually a really useful tool. So that was principle number 2, is defining your ideal future self so that you can have some indicator whether you're moving in the right direction. Otherwise, you're shooting in the dark. So even if you don't have a verbose, detailed picture of your ideal self, you can think of some key things that you might attribute to your ideal future self, whether it's, some material achievement, some achievement of value or virtue. Pick one area of your ideal future self where there's a gap between who you are now and who you theoretically will become in an ideal sense, who you want to become. And again, it could be something like a material achievement. I want to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and right now I'm a CEO of a small company. Or I want to spend more time with my kids. Right now, I spend no time with my kids. Or I want to act with more courage. Right now, I find myself lacking courage. Whatever the case may be, find something where there's a gap between who you are now and who you'd like to be. And it helps if the path between here and there is somewhat mysterious. I think that'll make this exercise a little more interesting, although it may make it harder. And what we're going to do is, from now to the end of the breakout rooms, we're going to be working on creating a clearer map, a clearer roadmap between here and there. We're going to be working on how do you actually, first of all, do the research phase of what do I need to do to achieve that? And then second, how do you do the planning phase of actually getting there in actionable steps? And so before we go into the breakout rooms, let's do maybe like 2 or 3 of these live, and we can crowdsource through our whole podcast audience here some methods to create that better map. And then when we go into the breakout rooms, I want everybody to do that individually in the small groups, and take some time brainstorming with each other, maybe describe that gap that we're talking about between your ideal future self and where you are now, so that people can help you sort of, fill in the plan for that gap. So everyone take a second to think of something. If you have thought of something and you're willing to be a guinea pig for a larger audience, I promise we'll be nice. Let us know in the chat. Otherwise, Alex is going to go first. Or maybe I will. Actually, I guess I can if you want, but
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear your last week, so I'll let's put you first.
all right.
This is really what this whole thing, this whole series is about. You first.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that was last week's anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, I can go first. I'll talk about. Okay. Let's talk about. This is a minor step between where I am now and where I'd like to be. It's not the end picture of my ideal self, but it is a small part of it. Oh, thanks, Joe. Joe says I'll let Chase go first. Lena, I expect you to go next, man. Okay, so it's a small gap. It's a small step in the right direction. However, it's one of those kinds of steps that has like little sub steps in it. It's a project that has a bunch of tasks. And for me, some of the tasks are in the light. I can see them. I know what to do. And some of the tasks are still in the dark. So we'll brainstorm for maybe 5 minutes. Anybody who's got any advice for this gap, feel free to fill it in. But here it is. So right now, I'm in a situation where I would say about a tenth of my income comes from what I would consider professional work, things that I love doing, things that I'm interested in doing, and that I would consider my career type things. Now, I would like to move that from a tenth of my income to all of my income. However, right now, the 90% of my income is what's paying the bills, things like that. So that's the gap, moving to a place where all of my income comes from professional work. And here are the steps that I sort of see. So again, in case you missed it, for me, professional work is audio production. I'm a sound designer, I'm an audio engineer, mixer, and I specialize in interactive audio, things like video games. So that's my bread and butter, my core. The steps that I see, first of all, continuing to refine my craft. I need to be the best I can possibly be in my lane. I don't need to bring up to, strong career level things that are fully outside of my domain. I get that. Like I don't need to go and practice soccer 10 hours a day. I need to be an amazing mix engineer. I need to be an awesome audio programmer. And those are things that, for me, that path is clear. I know somewhat that I need to be better at things like networking and actually getting to know people in the industry. That's a little bit more murky. And the thing that I think would help would be something like getting individual clients who can essentially be advocates for my work. Because when you are in the industry and you're like, oh, I need somebody to do my mix, it's so much more powerful to hear someone say, oh yeah, if you have Chase do it, he's going to give you something awesome. Versus if you hear me say, I can give you something awesome, right? It's like 10 times more powerful to have somebody else say it. Okay, so there's the gap. Let's talk about a roadmap, some actionable steps for filling that gap.
I'll start it off. Sorry, I want to make the joke, just quit your job and then 100% of your income will come from that.
You're not wrong, but
I think it's important to assess. I think there's some confounding things that may make it harder to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's decided on methods that may be ruled out. So, for example, just getting some low level job maybe that's somewhat in the domain, but like kind of sucks.
Mm.
Right. So that could help get more time spent in there. And I think that's one of the things that at least I can relate to. It's like, I don't necessarily want to take the worst job in my field because it's the one I can get. I want to try to basically do it by my own like bootstraps because I don't want to rely on anyone. Right. I want to be the one who's putting in the effort and being like, if I succeed, it's because I did this, 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 and this. And if I failed, it's probably because I didn't do this, this, and this. Whereas I think a lot of people, and I think you and me, have a kind of individualistic predisposition, which makes us not want to go the quickest, kind of most trod route. And that's something I've thought about in my own life. And I think I just wanted to point out that there could be presuppositions that you're not thinking of that are limiting your mindset on that.
Almost like a limiting belief that path is not going to take me the right direction or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like for me, I think I identified that in myself a couple years ago and realized that it was more of a fear of feeling too almost vulnerable to like somebody above me who's not like a client. I basically have to alter my creativity to their liking.
Got it. All right. Let's have Julie and then Joe go, and then we will move on to someone else. So, Julie.
Okay. Aside from the obvious value of mentors or following what's worked with others, there is a guy who puts out a weekly half-hour Zoom call that gives you the very basics on search engine optimization and a couple other topics. And for myself, I'm real basic. That's why I'm on the call. Other people have businesses and they wanted to learn what they're doing wrong. And then he would offer a paid, like Saturday, and keep it limited to a certain amount for people that wanted to go deeper. And at the same time, he was pitching himself as with those capabilities for all the people that decided, I don't want to learn it, but I want someone who does. And, like the way he gives himself freely like that.
Got it. Okay. I think I see what you're saying, Julie. Gotcha. All right. Joe.
Okay, you mentioned networking, and when I think of networking, I look at it a little bit differently, and I don't know if this is actually going to push you towards your goal initially, but I think the principle of rendering service first really comes into play here. When I think of networking, I find a problem for someone that I can solve, and without any expectation of getting anything back. And that has proved to be valuable in other areas where I made a connection for somebody that was, they were in a startup and it really took off. This particular connection worked really, really well. When it came time, if I needed anything, they would offer. Have offered assistance or anything, and I didn't take it up. I didn't take them up on that because it wasn't the reason I did it. However, it was an option there to pursue, like it was part of a network that I was able to create for myself by looking at it as a service. And then that allows you to see another opportunity and put that opportunity together with something else. So I look at it as you find a problem in the industry that you need, that you want to be in, and solve it. or for someone, without the expectation of getting anything. And you do that repeatedly, and it eventually comes back to you. So initially, what I would say is your income won't necessarily get over that 10% threshold that we're trying to get to. However, the opportunity to move into that industry becomes a much higher probability, where you can start to leverage. So it's, the whatever you're doing for other people. But again, I think it's really important to have it with the perspective of not getting anything in return other than the fact that you will be learning in the process.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best approach that I've seen to networking, because there are more times than not these trade associations, people show up and they just are looking for something from each other. And that simply doesn't work. I mean, they may have a mutual interest, and that may end up working, and that may be beneficial, and it may be, oh, okay. But ultimately, they're showing up for that reason. And I think that the idea of showing up with the idea of doing a service for someone is a much more effective form of networking.
That's awesome, Joe. That's inspiring. And I feel like as I'm taking notes here, I'm like, oh, here are ways that I can do that. So thank you. I see that Sally wants to comment on mine real quick. So Sally, last comment on mine, and then Victor has volunteered to be a guinea pig for the next one.
Oh.
So Sally.
So I'm going to refer to, there's a singer-performer named Janelle Monáe, and she has this like musical collective, and they were sending out their material to different music producers, different record companies, or industry record publishers, and nobody was really paying attention to them. So she decided to just do it herself, and they created all this content that became like wildly popular, and all of a sudden everybody was knocking down their door. So there's that, sometimes there's that element of, wanting to be recognized when, you don't necessarily need, of course it's great, but maybe you don't need it as much as you think. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sally. All right. Thank you guys. That's all really good.
And Chase, do you mind if I add one more thing? If you combine
Sure.
Joe's idea with your point about not being perfectionistic and just offering more service, thinking about it in a like optimum service mentality, I think that could even further help.
Yeah. Like the optimum between quantity and quality, something like that. Cool. All right. Victor, hit us. First, your gap between ideal and current.
All right. Yeah. So I recently picked up learning piano. So I am not a deep, well, I didn't have any introduction to music or any formal lessons. So I picked up piano, and I'm taking some music lessons over the last 6 months. I think I made some decent progress. However, not to the extent I want it to be. So that's where I am with one thing. And the second thing is I have a small startup, meaning it's a physical product-based startup where I design, and I kind of come up with a new product and take it to Kickstarter, test it out there, and if and when it works, get it to production and then take it to market. So that's what I've been doing last 1 year. And I had some decent success on a product, and I'm working on it. However, the thing is, there's a lot on my plate right now. So from design to prototyping to shooting a video to getting it to Kickstarter to marketing it and getting it manufactured and again, marketing again and getting it into the market. So these are the things on my plate. I know what I need to do, only that there is so much to learn, and there's a full-time job on the side. So, well, no, I should say that's the main thing. But so
Okay. I have a question to clarify. So let's really put this in terms of that you did a great job describing where you are now and sort of your vision of the path forward. Can you describe what does future Victor look like for this company? You know, you're right now you're playing multiple roles. What is the role that you have in the future when you've got all the help you need from employees and things like that doing the other roles? What's your role there?
my role would be to bring new products and services into the company.
Okay, so like a research and development design kind of thing.
Yes, research
Okay.
and development, and yes, design. Yes,
Okay, got it. So you want to move from fulfilling all the roles of development to and design to marketing and all this. You want to move from that to primarily doing the design work.
that's
Okay,
right. Yeah,
cool. Well, let's tap into our receiving sets to the universal storehouse of infinite intelligence and see if anybody's got any ideas for helping Victor build the path from where he is now to where he'd like to be. Joe. And then Rupali.
So, just I want to make sure a point of clarification as well. So you're working through the commercialization process, essentially. You're taking
that's right.
from Maya to, and then who are your clients within this process?
Like for each product, so it's an e-commerce business, so it would be, it's not, well, yeah, it's the end user who is actually buying the product.
Oh,
So
okay.
I am using Kickstarter as a platform to get the products known and then take it to e-commerce store, and then
To market.
so by marketing it, so people will come and buy the product.
Okay. Give me one more minute to come up with something. Okay. Now that I understand the process a little bit differently, I thought it was the commercial. It is the commercialization process. If I were to, I have to think through. I know I have a couple of ideas. I just want to think them through really quickly before I say anything. So I just wanted a point of clarification for a moment. I promise I will come back with some.
The one thing I'm struggling with at this point is to neatly distribute the time and to allocate time to the meaningful things. Since I have so much on my plate, it's getting tougher to prioritize, which is taking up a lot of time. I mean, so I'm losing a lot of time.
So the one thing I would say, and then we'll have Rupali and then Joe can jump back in and then gang. One thing I would say is I think it would help you to think of it like a project roadmap where you can set out in steps, and maybe it might help to work backward from take your ideal vision and then what was the step right before that. So maybe the ideal vision is, Victor Paul, CEO and lead designer, with this person handling the money, this person handling the marketing, this person handling the this and that, and just like fill that whole thing out as much as possible. And then take a step back. Maybe it's, well, prior to that, I was also handling the money because we didn't have somebody for that. So I was CEO and doing money, but somebody else was doing marketing and this and this and that. And then take a step back from there. Okay, before that, I was handling design and money, and there was, somebody else on marketing, but nobody was doing this. And as much as you can, like, go from the end and work backwards along those steps until you get back to where you are. That might be an easier way, or that might be one way of elucidating that path rather than working from here forward.
Got it. That puts things into perspective. Definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Chase.
Cool. Rupali.
Hi, Chase. Thank you. So, Victor, I have a couple of questions, and they're going to piggyback on what Chase was just saying. So the first thing is, have you done a SWOT analysis of your strengths and where the gaps are? So one thing to do is clearly identify where your strengths lie. From what you're saying, it's in product design and bringing in new products, right? And then once you know where the gaps are, think about growing a team, because you cannot do it all. And much like what Chase said, think about, who's going to do the marketing and who's going to handle the financials. So who are the people that you can inspire by your vision? It could be your friends, it could be your, closest associates. And once you get a team together, then you won't feel the pressure of, not having enough time or trying to do it all. Because when you try to do it all, you're spreading yourself too thin. And then things are going to, when you're going to have good days and not so good days. And when the not so good days happen, you're going to drop the ball. And so to avoid that, who can be just as excited as you are about the vision of the company? So that's one thought I had. And then the second thought was, have you considered having a mentor or advisor who can look at this process from afar? You're right in the middle of it. You're doing the day-to-day. You're trying to develop a strategy. You're trying to think long-term, and yet you have to do everything in a short-term basis. So the advisors or mentors will look at something from a much higher perspective, like a bird's eye view, so to say. And having that perspective to guide is helpful. So who are your well-wishers? Make a list and kind of tap into them. We talked about networking a few minutes ago, and that's where the power of networking lies, because clearly you must have done something, given something to receive something. So so look into your network for both of that. And then for your piano, I don't know if you have a future, Victor, for your piano playing, and what does that look like? Are you thinking of a recital? Are you thinking of a performance? Are you thinking of something? If you have a definite goal, then you can work towards it. If you say, by next December, I want to do something, then you can work, you can lay out the steps for it. So that's it from me. Thank you, Chase.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot,
That's
Rupali.
awesome.
It's been so helpful. I usually do SWOT analysis for my products. Never actually thought of doing it for myself. That's quite an insight. And mentorship, I think that's a very good thing. Usually, with my products, I took help from consulting people in those areas in marketing and in Kickstarter thing. But at the same time, I probably should get a good mentor who can show the way how the future looks. That's a quite good insights, Rupali. Thank you.
Cool.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gang. And then Joe, if you have collected your thoughts, you'll wrap things up there. Gang.
Yeah, so I think you have a lot on your plate. I think I have a similar problem. I have my own business and I try to take care of my kids and also grow the business, and lots of interests as well. Philosophy, psychology, I want to make movies, all this stuff. And recently I'm listening to a few books. I found it's very helpful. It's essentialism, stillness is the key, and indistractable. So all this book is actually point out about the same direction. It's about how you need to eliminate input, focus on important thing. You can have all the interests, but you can't do them at the same time. If you are already doing a startup, you need to devote all your attention to it. You have no time for piano. Sorry to tell you about that. Maybe after your business already in the right track, then you think about learning a piano. But I mean, you have to focus on one thing, especially at the beginning. I found those books really helpful. So as a polymath or other, we all have a lot of things we want to do, but we only have one life, and we have to take steps to do them, one at a time.
Yeah, point taken, King. Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Actually, most of the things that I just was about to say were covered, specifically the idea of finding, the first thing I would do is find partners to take care of the business process. And then I would also have a vision. That's the first thing I would also, a vision of the company, and almost have a high level business plan of where you are going to be in a year, where you're going to be in 5 years, the market that you're going after. And, so you mentioned R&D products, even specifically what R&D products are you going to be going after, because that'll help you identify which mentor to really align with initially. So even if it's across industries that you're looking, you can still identify, a mentor that, if you have a process that scales across multiple industries, you could still pick one industry to start with, and then start to build a process out from there. So for each industry, that how you're going to get these things to market. So I would put together. There's actually, I can send you something. It was like a 1-page plan of like even your financials. It does everything in 1 page, and what it does is it outlines 5-year plan, but it really forces you to put down a vision of where the company is going to be and the market it's going after and the technology that you're using. You may not even want to use Kickstarter as a platform if you do an analysis of all of the other platforms that are out there as well, that you may want to do something more custom. So that would be just off the top of my head.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Industries and cross industries. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I've been trying. Yeah, my product definitely is cross industry, cross niche product. So I actually faced this while marketing. I was trying to throw a wider net, and I wasn't successful in that. So maybe narrowing my target market is one way to go it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and having a vision will really help you align with all those other things. Everything else will fall in place once you have a vision.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. We have no more volunteers for guinea pigs. So Ryan, I'll let you have the last word here before we go into the breakout rooms.
All right. I think definitely, Joe, the point that you mentioned about having a vision, I think that's very important. I think one more thing I would suggest is sometimes when you have a vision, you can only imagine things based on your current knowledge, right? And I think there's a quote by, I think, JP Morgan. I think he said, "Go as far as you can see, and once you get there, you can see further." And it's always good to have a vision because the vision gives you direction. But know that you may not always get there because your knowledge is limited. So what I tend to do, or what I like to do in my own work, is I try to have the vision to guide me where I want to get to, and I would break it down into like smaller pieces. I would say, okay, maybe let me just try to get here in like 2 months or in 3 months, and in 3 months I'll reevaluate where I am based on what I know, and then I try to see, okay, do I still want to chase that vision, or should I switch directions? I think that's kind of helpful, because otherwise you feel that maybe I should just take this path, and anything else I should say no to, whereas that the other path might actually be useful to you. So you have to constantly reevaluate where you are and where you can be based on new information that comes in. I think that's useful. And as far as like learning the piano or the other hobbies, of course, these are also time consuming. One thing that I've I also have a lot of hobbies. I'm also a polymath, kind of like most of us, I guess. What I've come to realize myself is that uh, to know that you have a lifetime to do a lot of things, right? And if you if there are many things that you want to do, you can spread them out over your lifetime and do them all over the course of time. But uh, give yours like I personally like to give myself some uh, the allow myself to explore, right? So spend maybe half an hour, 20 minutes, or have a schedule like that. So okay, three times a week, I would do it for half an hour, right? You'll probably not become like a perfectionist like in a year, but you allow the dots to connect, right? You make the dots and the dots, and you believe that the dots will connect because the more you learn, you sleep over it. Uh, just you let the universe give you ideas, right? When you're not working on it, your mind will your mind subconsciously thinks about it. The next time you come back to the piano, you'll be slightly better. Not even you wouldn't have even thought about how you'd be better, but your fingers just start playing, right? Better than last time, and you don't know how it happened. So allow that process to happen, but don't be frustrated and stuff like that. Just know that the I think there's a lot of value in action versus just thinking about it and setting, thinking I'll do it 6 years from now, 5 years from now. Make small changes and make progress. I think that's important.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I'll say one more thing about the hobby thing before we wrap up. I think that hobbies keep you from burning out. I know that for me, especially if you can find a hobby that like has some physical benefit for you, like learning an instrument, perfecting a skill, exercise, whatever the hobby may be, it can allow your subconscious to work on your main thing. If you're spending all your waking hours on your startup, you may be missing things that you will only see by disconnecting your system 2 conscious mind from it and letting things percolate in the background, long enough to pop new ideas in, long enough to solidify information that you're absorbing, long enough to get away, get some breathing room. But yeah, I agree with Ryan. Like, with the piano thing, don't get frustrated with it. Like, find love in it and use it as a tool for making you a more efficient person, a more someone who is better locked into your other goals because you've found some love in an artistic pursuit.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for volunteering, Victor. That was very brave of you. Now, here's what we're going to do, folks. We will go into the breakout rooms and we will continue this process. Please try to volunteer some ideas. They could be big or small. They don't have to be based on material achievement. It can also be, like I said, things like how do I spend more time making wise decisions and focusing on the things that I can control versus the things that I can't. Something like that. As long as it's focused on helping you build the roadmap into your vision of your ideal future self. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Switch. We'll see you next week for the following principle, and have fun in the breakout rooms.